Blockhouses. They weren't just a New York City pop-punk rock and roll band. They were also a defensive fortification, used primarily during American colonial times. Though the whole basic idea of blockhouses goes a lot further back than that. So the first blockhouses were built in England during the 14th century, and it was a direct reaction to the new role that gunpowder technology was playing on the battlefield. At first, cannons and bombards were essentially really loud trebuchets. They were siege weapons, right? They were used offensively for battering down castles and city walls, most famously during the siege of Constantinople in 1453. But it wasn't long before people started to realize the defensive capability of gunpowder technology. And the first blockhouses back in England, I mean, they were just squat stone towers, essentially, with gun ports out of the wall so that they could shoot at an oncoming enemy. Cut to a few hundred years later, and gunpowder technology has immensely improved, as have blockhouses. As the English started to settle here in the New World, they quickly realized that blockhouses were actually really good at defending from Native American attacks. At that point, they were made out of wood, and typically they would be built with the second story a little bit bigger than the first story, so that they could put out fires easily that the enemy might light. Now, in my video about the Sudbury fight, I mentioned English garrison houses, which were basically the exact same principle as blockhouses. The thing about garrison houses, though, was that they weren't really military installations. They were just somebody's house that happened to be fortified. If your village, your settlement was under attack by Native Americans, then you just abandon your house, gather up your family, and flee to the nearest blockhouse or garrison house and hole up with the rest of the village as the native warriors, then tried to burn it down or overwhelm it. So when the British built Fort Holmes here in 1814, though they called it Fort George at the time, the name was changed by the Americans later, there already was and still is a fort on the south side of the island, on the cliffs overlooking the mainland. But they quickly realized, the British did, that the northern part of the island has much gentler terrain and was much more vulnerable to attack. So not only did Fort Holmes here command the high ground, but it also had this natural breastwork with a palisade with some really nasty looking sharpened stakes at the top. So anybody attacking this would have to navigate all of this and the wall and the stakes and soldiers up on the battlements firing down at them. But should the outer walls fall, well, then the defenders simply would retreat into the blockhouse itself. And the cool thing about Fort Holmes is that there's nowhere where you can attack it where you won't be exposed to fire from the defenders. I mean, it's not here, not over here, and I mean, certainly not even under this thing. You'd think if you just kind of go right under here, nobody can fire at you. Well, somebody over here is gonna, even just stick a sword out and get you in the neck. So despite the fact that this is completely badass, I'm sorry to say that it never actually was besieged, because when the Americans eventually tried to retake Mackinac from the British, well, the British, they just sallied out to defeat them in the field, Grey Worm style, but much more effective.